I've never told anyone the full story of what happened on Eastern Airlines Flight 401. Most people think they know. It's in the history books after all. December 29th, 1972. A Lockheed L-1011 TriStar crashed into the Everglades, killing 101 passengers and crew. They blame it on the pilots getting distracted by a burned-out landing gear indicator light. That's what the official report says. But that's not what really happened. I was there, I survived, and I've been carrying this burden for decades. My name is Daniel Harmon. In 1972, I was a 28-year-old salesman for IBM, flying back to Miami after spending Christmas with my family in New York. I'd done this route dozens of times. JFK to Miami International should have been routine. The day started normally enough. I arrived at JFK around 7 p.m. for our 9:20 departure. The terminal was crowded with holiday travelers, irritable after weather delays and canceled flights. I remember noticing how the overhead lights seemed to flicker as I walked to the gate, casting strange shadows across the faces of waiting passengers. At the gate, a thin, elderly man sat next to me. He had deep-set eyes and wore an Eastern Airlines uniform that looked several decades out of date. When he noticed me looking, he smiled. "First time flying?" he asked. "No, I fly this route all the time," I replied. "This one's different," he said, his voice oddly flat. "There are rules." I laughed, thinking he was making some kind of joke. Rules besides fastening my seatbelt and keeping my tray table up during takeoff? He didn't laugh. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper. "I wrote these down for you. You'll need them." I took the paper more out of politeness than interest and glanced at it. In shaky handwriting were 7 numbered items. I only read the first one before they called for boarding. Rule 1. If the cabin lights flicker 3 times in succession, close your eyes until you count to 47. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, dismissing it as the ramblings of an old man with dementia. When I looked up to thank him anyway, he was gone. I boarded the plane, Flight 401, scheduled for a 9:20 p.m. departure. The aircraft was a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, one of Eastern's newest additions to their fleet. As I settled into my seat, 12F, window, I noticed the crew seemed on edge. Flight attendant Stephanie Stanich kept glancing nervously at the cockpit door. Captain Bob Loft looked pale as he greeted passengers while they boarded. I should have recognized these as warning signs, but I was tired and just wanted to get home. As we taxied for takeoff, I felt the paper in my pocket. On impulse, I pulled it out and read the second rule. Rule 2. If a flight attendant asks if you'd like a drink 3 times in a row, decline each time. On the 4th request, ask for tomato juice. I snorted and put the paper away. Superstitious nonsense. The takeoff was smooth, and as we climbed to cruising altitude, I leaned back in my seat, ready to doze off for the flight to Miami. That's when the cabin lights flickered once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. I remembered Rule 1 but ignored it. That was my first mistake. Hello, viewers. If you wish your stories or experiences to be narrated by me, share them on our own subreddit, which you can join from the description below. I will pick the stories from the community and narrate them, and every once in a while, we will host a 3-hour story compilation. After the lights flickered, a strange coldness crept through the cabin. The woman next to me, middle-aged with carefully styled hair and chunky jewelry typical of the era, shivered and pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Did they turn the heat down?" she asked, rubbing her arms. I shook my head. "I don't think so." A flight attendant, Her name tag read Patricia, approached our row. She had a fixed smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Would you like a drink, sir?" she asked me. "Just water, thanks." She nodded and turned to the woman beside me, then back to me. "Would you like a drink, sir?" I blinked, confused. "Water, please," I just said. "Would you like a drink, sir?" Patricia asked again, her smile unwavering but her eyes wide with what I now recognized as fear. My blood ran cold as I remembered the second rule on that paper. I swallowed hard. "No, thank you," I replied carefully. She moved on to other passengers, but returned minutes later. "Would you like a drink, sir?" "No, thank you," I repeated, my heart beginning to race. She nodded stiffly and moved down the aisle, only to return yet again. "Would you like a drink, sir?" "No, thank you." Her fourth approach came only moments later. "Would you like a drink, sir?" My mouth dry, I whispered, "I'd like tomato juice, please." Patricia's shoulders relaxed slightly. She brought me a small can of tomato juice and a plastic cup filled with ice. As she set it down, she leaned in close. "Be careful," she whispered. "They're watching." Before I could ask who they were, she straightened and continued down the aisle. I took out the paper again and read the remaining rules, my hands trembling. Rule 3. If you see a child walking alone in the aisle after midnight, do not acknowledge them. Look at your lap until they pass. Rule 4. The bathroom in the rear of the plane is out of bounds after 11:30 p.m. Use only the forward lavatory. Rule 5. If the captain makes an announcement that includes the phrase, "slight delay," place your right hand flat against the window for exactly 30 seconds. Rule 6. If you feel a tap on your shoulder but no one is there, recite your full name backwards 3 times. Rule 7. Should the oxygen masks deploy, do not put them on. Hold your breath and count to 15 instead. I folded the paper back up and tried to calm myself. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe I was on one of those hidden camera shows. I glanced around for any sign of recording equipment but saw nothing unusual. The flight status screen showed we were cruising at 33,000 feet, somewhere over North Carolina. Our estimated arrival time in Miami was 11:45 p.m. I sipped my tomato juice and tried to rationalize what was happening. Perhaps the flight attendant had simply forgotten she'd already asked me about drinks. Maybe the cabin lights had flickered due to normal electrical fluctuations. Yet, something deep inside me knew better. At about 10:30 p.m., Captain Loft's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some minor turbulence ahead, so I've turned on the seatbelt sign. Also, we're facing a slight delay due to air traffic over Georgia. We should be arriving in Miami about 20 minutes behind schedule." Slight delay. The words from Rule 5 echoed in my mind. With a shaking hand, I pressed my palm flat against the cold window beside me and counted to 30. The glass felt unnaturally cold under my touch, almost burning with its intensity. When I removed my hand, a perfect imprint remained on the window, slowly fading away like breath on a mirror. The woman next to me had fallen asleep, her head lolled against her shoulder. Across the aisle, a businessman flipped through some papers, seemingly unfazed by anything unusual. Was I the only one noticing these things? Was I losing my mind? I checked my watch. 10:45 p.m. I decided to use the bathroom before the 11:30 deadline mentioned in Rule 4. As I made my way to the front lavatory, I noticed something odd about the passengers in the first-class cabin. They all sat perfectly straight, facing forward. None were reading, talking, or sleeping, and they all seemed to be wearing the same wristwatch. The lavatory was mercifully normal. As I washed my hands, I studied my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired but sane. This comforted me until I noticed something in the mirror behind me, a dark shape passing by the partially open door. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. When I returned to my seat, I found a napkin placed on top of my half-finished tomato juice. Written on it in what looked like red ink was a simple message. Smart boy. Keep following the rules. Only 3 hours left. I looked around frantically, but no one was paying me any attention. The flight attendants were all busy in the galley. I checked my watch again. It was exactly 11 p.m. 2 more hours until we landed in Miami. 2 more hours to follow these inexplicable rules. I could make it. I had to. But as the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight flight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong with Flight 401. Something far worse than a faulty landing gear indicator light. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. I kept checking my watch, watching as 11 p.m. became 11:15, then 11:30. At precisely 11:30, I heard a soft click from the back of the plane. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw a flight attendant placing an out-of-order sign on the rear lavatory door. Rule 4 was in effect. I felt a chill run down my spine. Most passengers were asleep now. The cabin dark except for a few reading lights. The woman next to me had taken a sleeping pill and was completely out, her breathing deep and regular. I envied her oblivion. I tried to distract myself by reading the in-flight magazine, but I couldn't focus on the words. Instead, I found myself scanning the cabin for anything unusual, jumping at every small sound. At 11:40 p.m., First Officer Albert Stockstill emerged from the cockpit. He paused at the front of the first-class cabin, surveying the passengers with an oddly mechanical turn of his head. When his gaze reached me in row 12, he held it for several uncomfortable seconds. Then, without speaking to any of the flight attendants, he returned to the cockpit. I realized I was gripping the armrest so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I forced myself to relax, to breathe. "Hey, you okay?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. A young man had taken the aisle seat in my row while the middle passenger slept. He was maybe 19 or 20, with the long hair and casual style of a college student returning from holiday break. "Yeah, fine," I managed. "Just not a fan of flying." "I get that," he said with an easy smile. "I'm Mark, by the way, heading home to Miami U." "Daniel," I replied, not wanting to be rude but also not wanting to engage. Something about this interaction felt wrong. "So, what's with that paper you keep checking?" Mark asked, nodding toward my pocket where I'd stashed the rules. My pulse quickened. "Just my itinerary," I lied. Cool. He leaned back in his seat. "Weird flight, huh?" "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "Just feels off somehow. And did you notice how cold it is?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I noticed." Mark glanced around, then leaned closer. "You know what happened to the guy who was supposed to sit here?" He patted the seat he was occupying. "No. What?" "He got up to use the bathroom about an hour ago. The one in the back. Never came back." I felt my mouth go dry. "Maybe he found another seat." "Maybe," Mark shrugged. "Or maybe he didn't follow the rules." My blood froze. "What rules?" Mark's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "You know what rules, Daniel." I blinked, and Mark's appearance seemed to waver, like heat rising from hot pavement. For just a split second, his face looked hollow, his eyes empty sockets. I squeezed my eyes shut and counted to 3. When I opened them, Mark looked normal again, though his smile remained unsettling. "Midnight's coming," he said, checking his watch. The same watch I'd noticed on the first-class passengers. Things get interesting after midnight. The cabin intercom chimed, and Captain Loft's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're currently flying over the Georgia-Florida border. We've been cleared for a more direct approach to Miami, which should make up for our earlier delay. Current time is 11:55 p.m., with an estimated arrival of 12:30 a.m. The temperature in Miami is a pleasant 68 degrees. The crew will be coming through with a final beverage service shortly." I glanced at Mark, but the seat beside me was empty. There was no indication anyone had been sitting there. No impression in the seat cushion. No lingering warmth. Had I imagined him? I checked my watch. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes until midnight. I pulled out the rules paper again and reread Rule 3. If you see a child walking alone in the aisle after midnight, do not acknowledge them. Look at your lap until they pass. As if on cue, the cabin lights flickered once, twice, 3 times. Remembering my earlier mistake, I quickly closed my eyes and began counting to 47 in my head. 1, 2, 3. Behind my closed eyelids, I sensed the lights continuing to flicker at irregular intervals. 22, 23, 24. Someone walked past my row, their footsteps unusually heavy for a flight attendant. 45, 46, 47. I opened my eyes. The cabin had settled into an eerie stillness. My watch now read exactly midnight. The woman next to me stirred in her sleep, murmuring something incoherent. Her face was contorted in what looked like pain or fear. Around the cabin, other sleeping passengers showed similar signs of distress, shifting and moaning in their seats. A soft, rhythmic tapping sound caught my attention. It seemed to be coming from the rear of the plane where the out-of-bounds lavatory was located. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I refused to look back there. From the corner of my eye, I detected movement in the aisle. Small, deliberate steps, getting closer. Rule 3 echoed in my mind. I immediately looked down at my lap, heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped right next to my row. From my peripheral vision, I could see small shoes with buckles, the kind a child might have worn in the 1950s, not 1972. 10 seconds passed. 20. The child didn't move on. A small hand, pale, almost bluish, reached into my field of vision, pointing at the rules paper in my lap. I kept my eyes down. "Mister," a voice whispered. High-pitched, but somehow wrong, like a poor imitation of a child's voice. "Mister, can you help me find my mommy?" Every instinct screamed at me to look up, to help this lost child. But the rules. I had to follow the rules. "Mister, please, I'm scared." A tear splashed onto the rules paper, but it wasn't mine. It was black, like ink or oil. The sound of someone clearing their throat came from further up the aisle. The child's hand withdrew, and the small feet moved away, continuing toward the back of the plane. I exhaled shakily, only then realizing I'd been holding my breath. Flight attendant Patricia appeared by my side moments later. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She leaned closer. "You're doing well. Better than most. Keep it up." "What's happening?" I finally managed to ask. Patricia glanced nervously up and down the aisle. "This plane isn't. It's not quite in the right place anymore. It's between..." "Between what?" "Between what was and what will be." She straightened suddenly, her face going blank. In a normal voice, she asked, "Would you like a final beverage before landing, sir?" Before I could answer, I felt a distinct tap on my shoulder. I turned, but the sleeping woman hadn't moved, and no one stood in the aisle on my other side. Rule 6. If you feel a tap on your shoulder but no one is there, recite your full name backwards 3 times. "Nomra Lainad," I whispered. "Nomra Lainad. Nomra Lainad." Patricia nodded approvingly and moved on. The cabin intercom chimed again. "This is First Officer Stockstill. We're beginning our initial descent into Miami International Airport. Current local time is 12:15 a.m. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The descent began normally enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was waiting for us on the ground. Or perhaps we weren't heading toward the ground at all, but somewhere else entirely. The aircraft began its gradual descent toward Miami. Through my window, I could see the lights of northern Florida glittering below us like scattered jewels on black velvet. Beautiful, normal. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that we would land safely, and this nightmare would end. Then I noticed something strange about those lights. They were blinking in unison, all of them, like a heartbeat. On, off, on, off. No city lights should do that. A soft bell chimed, and the seatbelt sign illuminated. Most passengers remained asleep, including the woman next to me. I glanced around the cabin and caught Patricia's eye. She was strapped into her jump seat, staring directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When our eyes met, she subtly shook her head, as if warning me. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Loft. We're experiencing some discrepancy with our landing gear indicator. Nothing to worry about, just a technical issue we need to verify. We're currently at 10,000 feet and descending. I've asked First Officer Stockstill to go down to the avionics bay to check the landing gear visually. We may need to circle for a few minutes while we sort this out." A chill ran through me. This was it, the exact situation that had allegedly caused the real Flight 401 crash. The pilots becoming distracted by a faulty landing gear indicator light, not noticing their gradual descent into the Everglades. But that hadn't happened yet. We were still in the air, still alive. The plane banked slightly to the right, and I felt the distinct change in engine pitch as we leveled off, presumably to circle while they sorted out the landing gear issue. The cabin lights dimmed momentarily, then returned to normal brightness. "Dan," a voice whispered, so close it could have been inside my head. "Danny boy." I whipped around, looking for the source, but everyone nearby was asleep. "Look at me, Danny." My gaze was drawn upward, toward the ceiling of the cabin. There, impossibly, was a face, or something like a face, pressed against the curved interior, as if the metal and plastic were a thin membrane. The features were distorted, stretched like putty, but I recognized the elderly man who had given me the rules at JFK. "Time's running out," the face said, its lips barely moving. "Rules change in the Everglades. New rules." "What do you mean?" I whispered. "We're landing at Miami Airport." A grin spread across the distorted face, stretching wider than any human mouth should. "Are we?" The face receded into the cabin ceiling, leaving no trace it was ever there. I felt dizzy, nauseous. Was I hallucinating? Going mad? The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't Captain Loft's voice. It was younger, higher pitched. First Officer Stockstill, I presumed. "Captain, I've checked the gear. The indicator is faulty, but the landing gear is down and locked. Repeat, gear is down and locked." There was a pause, then, "Roger that, Bert. Come on back up." This exchange chilled me to the bone. It matched almost exactly what I would later read in the official accident report, the conversation between Captain Loft and First Officer Stockstill moments before the crash. I glanced out the window again. We were lower now, maybe 2,000 feet, and I could no longer see city lights. Instead, I saw only darkness dotted with occasional pinpricks of light, airboats perhaps, or the camps of Everglades hunters and fishermen. We weren't circling Miami Airport. We were over the Everglades. I pressed my face against the window, straining to see what was ahead. Nothing but darkness. I looked down. The ground seemed closer than it should be for a plane still minutes from landing. My watch read 12:22 a.m. The date was December 29th, 1972. I had to do something. Warn someone. I unfastened my seatbelt and stood up. Patricia was at my side instantly. "Sir, you need to remain seated with your seatbelt fastened." "We're going to crash," I hissed. "We're over the Everglades, not Miami, and we're descending. The pilots don't realize—" "Sit down, Mr. Harmon," she said firmly, her eyes wide with fear, not of crashing, I realized, but of me. "Remember the rules." "Screw the rules, we're about to die." Several passengers stirred at my outburst, looking around in confusion. Patricia leaned in close, her nails digging into my arm. "You don't understand. The rules are the only thing keeping us alive right now. This isn't a normal flight. This isn't even December 29th anymore." "What are you talking about?" "We've already crashed, Mr. Harmon. Flight 401 went down in the Everglades at 12:29 a.m., December 29th, 1972. It's been happening over and over again, for what feels like eternity to us. The only ones who survive are the ones who follow the rules." I sank back into my seat, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I boarded this flight at JFK tonight. I remember it clearly." "Do you?" she challenged. "Or did you just remember it because that's how it always begins for passengers like you? The ones who get the rules." I tried to think back, to remember details of boarding the flight, of my Christmas with family in New York. The memories seemed to blur together, indistinct. "How many times?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I've lost count," Patricia replied. Her face suddenly looked much older, lined with exhaustion. "Some of us have been here for what feels like years. Others come and go. The ones who break the rules, they disappear permanently. Or worse." "Worse." She glanced toward the back of the plane. "They become like the others, the ones who tap your shoulder or walk the aisles after midnight." The cabin lights flickered 3 times in rapid succession. Automatically, I closed my eyes and counted to 47. When I opened them again, Patricia was gone, back at her jump seat. The plane was noticeably lower now. Out the window, I could make out the distinctive pattern of the Everglades. Dark water reflecting moonlight, patches of sawgrass, tree islands. We couldn't have been more than 1,000 feet up. I pulled out the rules paper again, searching desperately for anything that might help. Anything about what to do during a crash. There was nothing. Then, as I held the paper, new words began to appear at the bottom, as if written by an invisible hand. Rule 8. When the impact comes, hold your breath. The water that fills the cabin isn't water. Don't let it touch your lips. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. We were going to crash. It was really happening. I looked at my watch. 12:27 a.m. 2 minutes until impact, if Patricia was right. The sleeping woman next to me suddenly sat bolt upright, her eyes wide open but unseeing. "It comes from below," she said in a voice that wasn't hers, deeper, masculine. "It waits in the water. It has waited so long." Then she slumped back in her seat, once again asleep. The cabin intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Loft. We're making our final approach to Miami International. Weather is clear and we should be on the ground in about... Wait." There was a pause, then Loft's voice again, suddenly alarmed. "What's our altitude?" "Bert, what's our altitude?" Another voice, stock still, responded with rising panic. I thought you were watching it! Pull up, pull up! The engine suddenly roared as the pilots attempted to gain altitude, but I knew it was too late. We were too low, too heavy, moving too fast. I fastened my seatbelt tightly and braced myself against the seat in front of me. Around the cabin, other passengers were waking up, looking around in confusion as the plane's nose lifted sharply. "What's happening?" someone called out. "Just turbulence," a flight attendant responded automatically, though her face betrayed her terror. My watch read 12:29 a.m. I looked out the window one last time. The moonlight illuminated the approaching sawgrass, the black water between the patches of vegetation. I could even make out individual cypress trees on the nearest tree island. Then something else caught my eye. Something moving in the water. Something large. The plane's belly struck the first patch of sawgrass with a violent shudder. Metal screamed as the fuselage was torn open. The lights went out. In the instant before impact, I took a deep breath and held it, remembering Rule 8. The world became chaos. Screaming, tearing metal, explosive decompression. Then came the water. It surged through the ruptured cabin like a living thing, seeking, hungry. In the darkness, I could see that it glowed faintly, a sickly phosphorescent blue that no natural water should have. All around me, passengers who had survived the initial impact were thrashing, screaming as the strange water touched them. I kept my lips sealed, my breath held, as the liquid rose to my chest, my neck, my chin. My lungs burned for air. Spots danced before my eyes. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the water receded, draining away through the shattered floor of the cabin as quickly as it had come. I gasped for air, looking around wildly at the devastation. The cabin was torn open, moonlight streaming in through massive gashes in the fuselage. The air smelled of jet fuel, blood, and something else. Something ancient and rotten. Miraculously, I was alive. I had followed Rule 8. I had survived the crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 401. But as I looked out through the twisted metal at the dark Everglades beyond, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. Silence fell over the wreckage. The screaming had stopped, replaced by soft moans and the gentle lapping of water against metal. Moonlight streamed through the gaping holes in the fuselage, casting silver patches across the devastation. I remained strapped in my seat, afraid to move. The woman who had been sitting next to me was gone, her seat empty as if she'd never been there. In fact, looking around, I saw far fewer passengers than I remembered from the flight. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed through the broken cabin. No response. With shaking hands, I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood on unsteady legs. The floor of the cabin was tilted at a sharp angle, making it difficult to balance. Water, normal water I hoped, pooled at the lowest point, about ankle deep. The rules paper was still clutched in my hand, somehow dry despite the water that had surged through the cabin. New words were forming again. Rule 9. Stay with the wreckage until first light. What walks in the Everglades after midnight is not human. Rule 10. If you hear someone calling your name from the darkness, ignore it, no matter whose voice it uses. Rule 11. The tree island to the east is forbidden. The one to the north is safe. I carefully folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. Looking out through a large tear in the fuselage, I tried to get my bearings. The moon was bright enough to see by, illuminating the landscape of saw grass and shallow water surrounding the crashed aircraft. The plane had broken into several sections. I was in the forward section of the main cabin. The cockpit was still attached but crushed downward into the muck. Further back, perhaps 50 yards away, I could see the tail section, improbably intact and sticking up at an angle. Between the sections was nothing but scattered debris and dark water. I needed to find other survivors. Moving carefully through the tilted cabin, I called out again. "Hello? Anyone there?" A soft sound came from near the front, a whimper, barely audible. I moved toward it, navigating around overturned seats and fallen luggage. There, huddled beneath an oxygen mask that dangled from the ceiling, was a young woman. She was curled into a ball, shaking violently. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. "Hey," I said softly, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "Are you hurt badly?" She looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "They took them," she whispered. "They took all of them." "Who took who?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "The others, the passengers." She pointed toward the shattered windows. Things came out of the water. They looked like people, but wrong. They called people by name, and when they answered... She trailed off, shuddering. Rule 10 flashed in my mind. If you hear someone calling your name from the darkness, ignore it, no matter whose voice it uses. "What's your name?" I asked. "Beverly," she replied. "Beverly Martin. I was going to Miami to visit my sister." Her voice cracked. "I don't think I'll make it now." "Don't say that," I said firmly. "We're going to survive this. I'm Daniel." I hesitated, then asked, Did someone give you a list of rules? Before the flight?" Beverly's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I got one too. Have you been following them?" She nodded. "That's why I'm still here, I think. I didn't answer when they called my name. I saw what happened to those who did." "What happened?" Beverly looked away. "They went willingly into the water, to the things that called them." She swallowed hard. "They're still out there, being worn." "Worn?" "Like costumes," she whispered. "I saw Mr. Reynolds. He was sitting across from me, answer when something called his name. He waded out into the water. Then, 10 minutes later, I saw him again, standing at the edge of the sawgrass. But it wasn't him anymore. The way it moved was all wrong." I thought of the child in the aisle, of Mark with his too wide smile, of the face pressed against the cabin ceiling. Things pretending to be human. "We need to stay in the wreckage until dawn," I told her, showing her Rule 9 on my paper. "Then we can try to find help." Beverly nodded, then froze, her eyes fixed on something behind me. "Daniel," she whispered. "Don't turn around. Something just climbed into the plane." My blood turned to ice. I could hear it now. A wet, slithering sound, like something waterlogged, dragging itself across metal. "Danny boy," called a familiar voice. My father's voice. "Is that you, son? I came to help." Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to respond. It sounded exactly like my father, the same gentle tone he'd use when I was scared as a child. But my father was in New York. This wasn't him. "It's not real," I whispered to Beverly. "Whatever you hear, it's not real." "Daniel," the voice called again, closer now. "Why won't you look at me, son? Don't you love your old man anymore?" The slithering sound continued, coming nearer. I could smell something foul, like rotting vegetation and stagnant water. "Danny," my mother's voice now, sweet and concerned. "We've been so worried. Turn around, sweetheart. Let me see your face." Beverly whimpered. "Make it stop," she pleaded. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "Close your eyes," I whispered. "Cover your ears if you can. It'll go away eventually." "Daniel Harmon," a new voice called. Patricia, the flight attendant. "You need to evacuate the aircraft. There's a rescue team waiting outside. Follow me." The thing was right behind us now. I could feel its cold presence, hear its wet breathing. Something dripped onto my shoulder, black, viscous, smelling of decay. I fought the overwhelming urge to turn and look. "Join us, Danny," my father's voice again, right at my ear. "The water feels wonderful. Everything makes sense once you're in the water." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping Beverly's hand like a lifeline. "It's not real," I repeated, as much for myself as for her. "It's not real." A minute passed, then another. Gradually, the presence receded. The slithering sound moved away, back toward the ruptured fuselage. When I finally dared to open my eyes, it was gone. Beverly was pale, trembling. "It spoke to me too," she whispered, using my fiancé's voice. "How did it know?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think we need to find a more defensible position." Looking around, I spotted the galley area, which was relatively intact. It had only small windows and just one entrance we could monitor. "There," I said, pointing. "We'll barricade ourselves in until morning." We moved carefully through the wreckage toward the galley. Outside, I could hear voices calling in the darkness. Some I recognized, like Captain Loft and the mysterious Mark, and others that were strangers to me, but clearly meant for other survivors. The galley was a mess of scattered trays, broken glasses, and spilled beverages. But it was enclosed on 3 sides, with only a narrow entrance. We dragged a serving cart across the opening, creating a makeshift barricade. "What time is it?" Beverly asked. I checked my watch. 1:15 a.m. "Hours until dawn," I said grimly. Beverly pulled out her own rules paper. "Mine has something yours doesn't," she said, pointing to an additional rule at the bottom. Rule 12. At 3:33 a.m., recite the names of everyone you've ever loved. Miss no one, or they will be taken. "That's oddly specific," I said, unnerved. "And personal." "Maybe the rules are different for each person," Beverly suggested. I nodded slowly. That would make sense. Tailored to each survivor. As if in response to this realization, new words appeared at the bottom of my rules paper. Rule 12. When the lights appear over the northern tree island, count them. If there are more than 7, cover your eyes and ears until dawn. I showed it to Beverly. Her eyes widened. "They know we're talking about them," she whispered. "The rules. They're alive somehow." A distant scream echoed across the Everglades, abruptly cut short. "Another survivor," I said grimly. "Someone who broke the rules." Beverly huddled closer to me. "Do you think anyone else is still alive?" "I hope so," I replied, though in truth I was beginning to doubt it. If they got a rules paper and followed it, maybe? Outside our barricaded galley, something large splashed through the shallow water surrounding the wreckage. Then another splash, and another. They were coming back, and this time I sensed they wouldn't be satisfied with just calling our names from the darkness. The splashing grew closer, circling the wreckage like predators testing their prey's defenses. Beverly and I remained absolutely still, barely breathing as shadows passed by the small galley windows. "They're looking for us," Beverly whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, watching a dark silhouette pause outside the nearest window. It had a human shape, but there was something profoundly wrong about its proportions. Arms too long, neck bent at an impossible angle. For 20 excruciating minutes, the things prowled around the wreckage. Occasionally, one would call out, using a familiar voice. I heard Captain Loft announce an all-clear, Patricia urge passengers to evacuate, and even Mark's casual voice inviting us to come check this out. Beverly flinched when something used her fiancé's voice again, and later, a woman I assumed was her sister. Eventually, the voices and splashing receded, moving toward the distant tail section. "I think they're gone," I whispered, though I wasn't entirely convinced. For now, at least. Beverly relaxed slightly, leaning back against the galley cabinet. "What are they?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, but I think they've been here a long time. Maybe they're what the Seminole legends about the Everglades were warning about." My watch now read 2:10 a.m. The night was crawling by with agonizing slowness. "We need a plan," I said, trying to think logically despite the surreal horror of our situation. "If we make it to dawn, we need to find our way out of the Everglades." Beverly pointed to my rules paper. "What about that?" Rule 11 mentioned a safe tree island to the north. I nodded. "That's our best bet. But we'll need to be careful. These things seem to hunt primarily at night, but I wouldn't bet on them completely disappearing during daylight." As we talked, I noticed something strange about the water seeping into the galley. It had a faint, pulsing glow, similar to the phosphorescent water that had surged through the cabin immediately after the crash. "Beverly," I said, pointing to the water. "Look." She turned, eyes widening. "It's glowing." The luminescent water was flowing in a distinct pattern, forming what looked like symbols on the galley floor. They resembled no writing system I recognized. Fluid, curved shapes that hurt my eyes if I looked at them directly. "Don't stare at it," I warned, remembering how some passengers had reacted when the strange water touched them during the crash. Beverly averted her eyes. "What does it mean?" Before I could answer, we heard a new sound outside, not splashing or voices, but a low, rhythmic humming. It started softly, but grew steadily louder, resonating through the metal framework of the aircraft. The glowing symbols on the floor pulsed in time with the humming, growing brighter with each beat. "This can't be good," I muttered. As the humming intensified, the crashed plane began to vibrate. Loose items, cups, trays, broken glass, skittered across surfaces. The serving cart we'd used as a barricade inched backward, metal legs scraping against the floor. "Something's happening," Beverly whispered, clutching my arm. The humming peaked in a deafening crescendo, and then silence. Absolute, complete silence. Even the natural sounds of the Everglades, insects, frogs, distant birds, had vanished. In that eerie quiet, a new sound emerged. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving through the main cabin toward the galley. Not the wet, slithering movement of the creatures we'd heard earlier, but something solid, human-like. The cart blocking our exit suddenly slid aside with a metallic screech, though no one was touching it. Standing in the open doorway was Captain Robert Loft. He looked normal, uniform neat, captain's hat in place, expression professional. The only discordant note was that he was completely dry, despite the waist-deep water outside. "Mr. Harmon," he said calmly. "Ms. Martin, I'm glad to see you both made it." I tensed, pulling Beverly slightly behind me. This had to be another trick, another impersonation by the things in the water. "Stay back," I warned. Loft raised his hands placatingly. "I understand your caution, but I assure you, I'm not one of them. I'm something else entirely." "What are you?" Beverly demanded. "I'm the real Captain Loft," he replied. "Or I was. Now I'm a guardian of sorts, a counterbalance to what lives in these waters." "Why should we believe you?" I asked. Loft reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper, identical to our rules lists. "Because I'm the one who wrote the rules. For both of you. For all the survivors who might escape the cycle." I glanced at Beverly, uncertain. The captain certainly seemed different from the grotesque entities outside. He was articulate, composed, his movements natural. "If you're really Captain Loft," I said cautiously, "then tell us what's happening. What is this place?" Why are we experiencing Flight 401's crash over and over? Loft sighed, suddenly looking much older, wearier. May I come in? It's not safe to linger in doorways. Boundaries are permeable here. After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. Loft stepped into the galley and carefully positioned the cart back across the entrance. This is difficult to explain, he began, especially with our limited time. The simplest way to put it, we're caught in a fold of reality, a place where time loops back on itself, centered around moments of great tragedy or death. Like the crash of Flight 401, Beverly said. Exactly. But it's more than that. The Everglades are special, old. The water here has properties not found elsewhere, and there are things that live in that water, ancient things that feed on death and suffering and fear. The creatures outside, I said. The ones mimicking our loved ones. Loft nodded. They're parasites in a way. They attach themselves to tragedies, to places of mass death. They've been here long before Europeans arrived. The Seminole and Calusa knew about them, avoided these areas, especially at night. But why the rules? Beverly asked. Why help us survive? Loft's expression darkened. Because I'm responsible, in part. My distraction caused this crash. 101 people died because I was fixated on a faulty indicator light. I should have been monitoring our altitude. His voice broke slightly. I've been trying to make amends ever since. How long have you been here? I asked. Time doesn't work normally here, he replied. For me, it feels like decades. For others, like Stockstill or some of the flight attendants, it might be just moments. We exist in a sort of limbo. And the rules? I pressed. They're a defense mechanism. The entities here operate according to certain patterns, certain rules of their own. If you know those patterns, you can avoid them, survive them. So you've been giving these rules to passengers, Beverly said, trying to help them escape the loop. Yes, Loft confirmed, though few manage to follow them correctly. The entities are persuasive. They know exactly what voices to use, what forms to take. I thought of how nearly I'd turned when I heard my father's voice. What happens to those who break the rules? Who answer when called? Loft's face was grim. They're taken, absorbed. Their memories, their forms, used by the entities to lure others. It's not a fate I would wish on anyone. And if we follow all the rules? Beverly asked, hope creeping into her voice. We can escape? Potentially, Loft said carefully. If you make it to dawn, reach the North Tree Island and perform the final ritual correctly. Final ritual? I repeated. There's nothing about that on my list. The final rule appears only when needed, Loft explained. When you reach the North Island, if you've followed all previous rules correctly. A distant howl echoed across the Everglades. Not animal, not human, but something in between. Loft tensed. They're calling the hunt, he said quietly. They know I'm here. I've stayed too long. Wait, I protested. We still have questions. How do we reach the North Island? What's this ritual? Loft moved toward the barricade. I can't stay. They'll find you if I do. He pulled something from his pocket, a compass, old-fashioned but functional. Take this. North is complicated here. This will guide you truly. He handed me the compass. The needle spun wildly for a moment, then settled, pointing toward what I would have sworn was east, not north. One last thing, Loft said urgently. Trust no one you meet, not even someone who knows the rules. The entities are learning, adapting. They can read the rules now, use them against you. Even you? Beverly asked pointedly. A sad smile crossed Loft's face. Wise girl. Yes, even me. Don't trust anything I say after this moment. In fact," he reached into his jacket, withdrew a pen, and quickly wrote something on both our rules papers. New words appeared beneath his handwriting. Rule 13. Captain Loft is not to be trusted after 3 a.m. My watch read 2:58 a.m. "Time for me to go," Loft said, checking his own watch. "Remember, North Island before dawn. Follow every rule precisely, and wait for the final instruction." "Thank you," I said sincerely, "for trying to help us, for the rules." Loft nodded solemnly. "Good luck, Mr. Harmon, Ms. Martin." He glanced at his watch again. 3 a.m. exactly. Something subtle shifted in his demeanor. His posture stiffened slightly. His eyes hardened. "I must return to my duties," he said, his voice now oddly formal. "Remain here until dawn." With that, he moved the cart aside, stepped out of the galley, and disappeared into the darkness of the main cabin. Beverly and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Did you notice," she began, "the change at exactly 3 o'clock? "Yeah," I replied. "He wrote that rule just in time." "So we can't trust anything he told us after that point," Beverly said, "including his instruction to stay here until dawn." I considered this. "Which means we should probably leave now," Beverly finished, "while the entities are distracted by him." I nodded, pulling out my rules paper to check if there were any relevant instructions. Beverly did the same, then gasped. "Look," she said, pointing to her Rule 12. "At 3:33 a.m., recite the names of everyone you've ever loved. Miss no one, or they will be taken." "It's 3:10 now," I said. "We need to get moving so you can complete that ritual by 3:33. I checked my own Rule 12. When the lights appear over the northern tree island, count them. If there are more than 7, cover your eyes and ears until dawn. "We need to head north," I said, taking out Loft's compass, "toward that tree island." Cautiously, we moved the cart and peered out into the main cabin. It was dark and silent, no sign of Loft or anything else moving. "Ready?" I whispered. Beverly took a deep breath and nodded. Together, we stepped out of our shelter and into the heart of the Everglades night. Leaving the relative safety of the aircraft felt like stepping into another world entirely. The Everglades at night were alive with sounds, water lapping against debris, distant splashes, and the occasional unnatural cry that made my skin crawl. The main fuselage of Flight 401 lay partially submerged, its torn metal gleaming dully in the moonlight. We carefully navigated through the wreckage, emerging from a large gash in the side of the plane into knee-deep water. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of jet fuel, mixed with the organic scent of the swamp. All around us stretched an alien landscape of sawgrass and shallow water, broken by scattered tree islands that rose like dark sentinels against the night sky. I held Loft's compass in front of me, watching as the needle steadfastly pointed toward what should have been east. "This way," I whispered to Beverly, indicating the direction. We moved slowly through the water, careful to make as little noise as possible. The bottom was treacherous, sometimes firm, sometimes sucking mud that threatened to trap our feet. Small, unidentifiable things brushed against my legs beneath the surface, making me flinch each time. "How far do you think?" Beverly asked softly. I stared into the darkness, trying to gauge the distance to the nearest tree island in the direction the compass pointed. "Half a mile, maybe?" Hard to tell in this light. My watch read 3:22 a.m. We had just 11 minutes before Beverly needed to complete her 3:33 ritual. "We should hurry," I said. "Your rule—" A splash to our right cut me off. We froze, watching as ripples spread across the water's surface. Nothing visible had caused it. "Keep moving," I urged after a moment. "Slowly." We continued forward, the water gradually deepening to mid-thigh level. Walking became harder, each step requiring conscious effort to lift our feet from the clinging mud below. The wreckage receded behind us, its silhouette growing smaller until it was just a dark shape against the horizon. Ahead, the tree island loomed larger, a small but dense hammock of cypress trees and palmettos rising from the marsh. Beverly suddenly clutched my arm. "Did you hear that?" I listened. At first, nothing but the ambient sounds of the Everglades. Then, voices, multiple voices, seemingly coming from all directions, whispering, calling, too low to make out words, but unmistakably human in tone. "Ignore them," I said firmly. "Keep your eyes on the island." The voices grew louder as we progressed, more distinct. I could pick out individual words now. Help, please, cold, spoken in different voices, men and women, young and old. My watch read 3:30 a.m. 3 minutes until Beverly's deadline. "We need to hurry," I said, increasing my pace despite the resistant water. Just a little further. The tree island was close now, maybe 100 yards away. I could make out individual cypress trees, their gnarled trunks and Spanish moss creating twisted shadows. Suddenly, the water ahead of us began to ripple and churn, as if something large was moving beneath the surface, heading our way. "Daniel," Beverly whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Keep going," I insisted. "We're almost there." The disturbance in the water grew more pronounced, a V-shaped wake now clearly visible in the moonlight, converging on our position. 50 yards from the island, the water erupted in front of us. Something rose up, a dark, humanoid shape, but wrong in a way that defied description. Its proportions were distorted, limbs too long and bent at impossible angles. Where its face should have been was only a smooth, featureless expanse of skin, glistening wet in the moonlight. Beverly stifled a scream. I stood frozen, unable to look away from the abomination before us. The faceless thing cocked its head, as if studying us. Then, impossibly, a seam appeared in the smooth skin of its face, widening into something approximating a mouth. From this grotesque opening came a perfect imitation of Captain Loft's voice. "You're going the wrong way. The North Island is in the other direction." I gripped the compass tighter, seeing the needle still pointing steadfastly toward the island ahead of us. "You're lying," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The compass doesn't lie." The thing's head tilted further, nearly upside down now. "Daniel Harmon," it said, now using my father's voice. "Son, that compass is broken. Let me help you." "Don't listen," Beverly hissed. "Look at the time." My watch read 3:32 a.m., 1 minute left. "Beverly needs to do her ritual," I said, backing away from the creature. "Now." The thing stepped toward us, water cascading from its misshapen form. "What ritual?" it asked in Beverly's sister's voice. "Beverly, it's me. There's no ritual. Come with me. I'll keep you safe." Beverly's face hardened. She took a deep breath and began. "John Martin, my father. Sarah Martin, my mother. Emily Martin, my sister." The creature let out an inhuman shriek, the sound so unnatural it seemed to distort the air around us. It lunged forward, unnaturally fast. I stepped in front of Beverly, shielding her as she continued her recitation. "Robert Simmons, my fiancé. Thomas Martin, my grandfather. Ruth Martin, my grandmother." The thing recoiled as if each name caused it physical pain. The water around us began to glow with that same eerie phosphorescence we'd seen in the plane. "Karen Simmons, my future mother-in-law," Beverly continued, her voice stronger now. "David Simmons, my future father-in-law. Jessica Hughes, my best friend." The creature thrashed in the glowing water, its form seeming to melt and reform with each name. More shapes emerged from the water around us, similar faceless figures, all converging on our position. Michael Hughes, Jessica's husband, Beverly pressed on, naming each person deliberately. Amanda Sellers, my college roommate. Professor Williams, my mentor. With each name, the water glowed brighter, forming a circle of light around us that the creatures couldn't seem to cross. They paced at the edge of this luminescent barrier, their faceless heads swiveling in apparent confusion. Daniel Harmon, Beverly finished, glancing at me with a small smile. My friend. The moment she spoke the final name, the glowing circle pulsed brilliantly, expanding outward in a shockwave that sent the creatures tumbling back into the dark water. In the sudden flash, I caught glimpses of dozens more entities in the swamp around us, some humanoid, others defying classification entirely. Then darkness returned, the glow fading to nothing. The water was still once more. My watch read 3:34 a.m. Beverly had completed her ritual just in time. That was... I trailed off, unable to find adequate words. Terrifying, Beverly supplied, her voice shaky but determined. Let's get to that island before they come back. We hurried forward, splashing through the water with little attempt at stealth now. The creatures had been temporarily repelled, but I doubted they'd stay away for long. The island loomed before us, a dark mass of vegetation rising from the water. As we drew closer, I could make out a narrow strip of relatively dry land, a small beach of sorts, leading up to the tree line. Just as we reached the shallows, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Something large moving through the water behind us, closing fast. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Beverly's hand and pulling her toward the shore. We splashed desperately through the shallowing water, stumbling on the uneven bottom. Behind us, the splashing grew louder, more frenzied. My feet hit solid ground. A few more steps, and we were fully on the island, collapsing on the damp earth, gasping for breath. A terrible howl of frustration echoed across the water. Looking back, I saw multiple dark shapes at the water's edge, pacing back and forth like predators denied their prey. "They can't come onto the island," Beverly observed, wide-eyed. "Rule 11, I reminded her. "The tree island to the north is safe." We watched for several minutes as the creatures continued their futile patrol of the shoreline. Eventually, they retreated into deeper water, disappearing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. "We made it," Beverly said, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. "For now," I cautioned, checking my watch. 3:55 a.m. We still have hours until dawn. We moved further onto the island, away from the water's edge. The vegetation was dense but not impenetrable, creating a natural maze of cypress trees, palmettos, and ferns. The ground rose slightly toward the center of the island, offering firmer footing. In the heart of the small hammock, we found a relatively clear space surrounded by the massive trunks of old cypress trees. It felt strangely peaceful here, protected. "We should rest," I suggested. "Take turns keeping watch." Beverly nodded, sinking down with her back against one of the trees. "I still can't believe this is happening," she said quietly. "Yesterday I was celebrating Christmas with my family in New York. Now I'm in the Everglades, running from whatever those things are." "I know," I said, sitting beside her. "It doesn't seem real." "But it is," she said firmly, "and we need to survive it." We fell silent, listening to the night sounds of the island, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush, the distant call of a night bird, the constant chorus of insects. Normal sounds, reassuring sounds. My eyelids grew heavy as the adrenaline of our escape began to fade. I forced myself to stay alert, periodically checking my watch and scanning our surroundings. At 4:17 a.m., I noticed something strange. Tiny points of light were appearing in the air around the island, like fireflies but more stable, hovering motionless among the trees. "Beverly," I whispered, gently shaking her from the light doze she'd fallen into. "Look." She blinked awake, following my gaze to the lights. "What are they?" I remembered my Rule 12. When the lights appear over the northern tree island, count them. If there are more than 7, cover your eyes and ears until dawn. "We need to count them," I said urgently. Together we tallied the glowing points, 1 near a cypress knee, 2 hovering above a palmetto frond, 3 and 4 suspended between tree branches, 5 drifting near the edge of our clearing, 6 materialized directly overhead, pulsing gently. "6, Beverly confirmed. "Is that good?" Before I could answer, another light winked into existence at the edge of the clearing. 7. I held my breath, waiting. Around us, the night had gone completely silent. Then, as if a dam had broken, lights began to appear everywhere. Dozens, hundreds of them, filling the air around us like stars brought down to earth. "Cover your eyes and ears," I shouted, following my own instruction instantly. Through my fingers, I could see the lights growing brighter, pulsing in unison, drawing closer. A high-pitched whine began to build, penetrating even through my covered ears. I pressed my hands tighter against my head, squeezing my eyes shut as the light became blinding even through my eyelids. And in that moment of sensory isolation, cut off from sight and sound, I felt something brush against my mind. Ancient, vast, and utterly alien. The presence in my mind was overwhelming, like standing at the edge of an ocean during a storm, feeling the immensity of something that could swallow you whole without noticing. I couldn't comprehend its thoughts, only its vastness. It seemed to examine me with detached curiosity, like a scientist studying a specimen under glass. Images flashed through my consciousness. Flight 401 taking off from JFK, but viewed from above, as if I were floating over the aircraft. The plane flying through darkness. The fatal descent into the Everglades, seen simultaneously from within the cockpit and from below the water. Then older memories that weren't mine. Spanish explorers venturing into the Everglades, their faces contorted in terror as something pulled them beneath the dark water. Seminole warriors performing rituals at the edge of tree islands, leaving offerings to appease what lived in the depths. Early settlers disappearing without trace, their abandoned homesteads slowly reclaimed by the swamp. The entities seemed to be showing me its history, its long, patient existence in this place, feeding on fear and death across centuries. I tried to retreat from this mental invasion, but there was nowhere to go. The presence filled every corner of my mind, sifting through my memories as easily as turning pages in a book. Then, abruptly, it withdrew. The sensation was like a vacuum, leaving me disoriented and gasping. I became aware of a ringing silence, and gradually the return of normal sounds, insects, wind in the cypress trees, Beverly's ragged breathing beside me. "Daniel," she whispered, "is it over?" Cautiously, I lowered my hands from my ears and opened my eyes. The hundreds of lights were gone. Only 7 remained, hovering in a perfect circle around us. "I think so," I replied, my voice hoarse. Did you feel it? In your mind?" Beverly nodded, her face pale in the moonlight filtering through the canopy. "It showed me things. The crash, but also before, long before. Me too." I checked my watch. 4:45 a.m. Dawn was still more than an hour away. As we watched, the 7 remaining lights began to move, arranging themselves in a straight line pointing deeper into the island. "I think they want us to follow," Beverly said. I hesitated, remembering Loft's warning about trusting nothing. But the rules paper in my pocket suddenly felt warm. I pulled it out to find new text forming. Rule 14. Follow the 7 lights to the center. What waits there will show you the way home. Beverly checked her own paper, which showed the same new rule. We exchanged glances, silently acknowledging our fear, but also our determination. We'd come this far by following the rules. We had to trust them now. The path indicated by the lights led us through dense vegetation, along what might have been an animal trail. The ground rose steadily, firmer beneath our feet as we moved away from the water. After about 10 minutes of careful progress, the trail opened onto a clearing unlike anything I would have expected to find in the Everglades. A perfect circle, perhaps 30 feet across, completely devoid of vegetation. The ground was dark soil, unnaturally smooth and level. At the center stood a single, massive cypress tree. It must have been centuries old, its trunk wider than both of us could have encircled with our arms. Its branches spread in all directions, creating a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The 7 lights floated toward the tree, arranging themselves in a vertical line along its trunk, illuminating what appeared to be symbols carved into the bark, similar to the glowing patterns we'd seen in the water earlier. As we approached, I noticed objects hanging from the lower branches, small items that caught the light and swayed gently in the breeze. Drawing closer, I realized with a chill what they were. Personal effects. A wedding ring, a pocket watch, a child's hair ribbon, a set of military dog tags, dozens more. Memorials, Beverly whispered, for those who didn't make it. My eyes were drawn to one item in particular, a pilot's wings badge, identical to the one Captain Loft had worn on his uniform. Beside it hung a flight attendant's pin with the Eastern Airlines logo. The lights pulsed once, drawing our attention back to the symbols on the trunk. As we watched, they began to glow with the same phosphorescence we'd seen in the water. A new rule appeared on our papers. Rule 15. Place your hand on the tree and speak your full name and the current date. Then speak the name of your destination. Beverly looked at me nervously. Should I go first? I nodded, watching as she stepped forward and placed her palm against one of the glowing symbols. The tree seemed to pulse beneath her touch, the symbols brightening. Beverly Ann Martin, she said clearly. December 29th, 1972. My destination is Miami, Florida. The symbols flared brilliantly, and for a moment Beverly seemed to shimmer, her outline becoming indistinct. Then the light faded, and she stumbled back, removing her hand from the tree. What happened? I asked urgently. Are you okay? She looked at her hand in wonder. It felt like it recognized me, like it was reading me somehow. She turned to me, eyes wide. I saw something, Daniel. For just a second, I saw Miami. Not just any Miami, my sister's neighborhood, her actual street. My turn now. I approached the tree with trepidation, placing my palm against a symbol that seemed to pulse in anticipation of my touch. Daniel James Harmon, I stated firmly. December 29th, 1972. My destination is Miami, Florida. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. It felt like my consciousness was being pulled into the tree, spreading through its roots and branches. I sensed age, immense ancient time passing, and a strange intelligence, neither malevolent nor benevolent, merely other. Then, like Beverly, I saw a flash of Miami, my apartment building, my street, exactly as I'd left it days ago. When I removed my hand, I was shaking. I saw it too, I confirmed. Home. The symbols on the tree rearranged themselves, forming new patterns. The 7 lights moved again, this time positioning themselves in a semicircle facing east. A final rule appeared on our papers. Rule 16. At first light, face east and recite, "What was lost is found. What was taken is returned. The cycle breaks, but memory remains. Then close your eyes until you feel solid ground beneath your feet." My watch read 5:30 a.m. The sky was beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly. Not dawn yet, but the first hint that night was ending. "We just have to wait for sunrise," Beverly said, the relief evident in her voice. I nodded, but something was nagging at me, a sense that we were missing something important. "It feels too easy," I admitted. "After everything we've been through, just wait for dawn and say a few words." As if in response to my doubt, a cold wind swept through the clearing, rustling the items hanging from the cypress branches. The 7 lights flickered momentarily. "Daniel," Beverly whispered, pointing toward the edge of the clearing. Dark shapes were emerging from the vegetation, the faceless entities from the water, somehow now able to move onto the island. They stood motionless at the perimeter, their blank faces turned toward us, water still dripping from their misshapen forms. "I thought they couldn't come onto the island," I said, backing closer to the tree. "Rules change," came a familiar voice. Captain Loft stepped into the clearing, his uniform now soaking wet, his movements slightly too fluid to be human. "I warned you about that." This wasn't the real Loft, or whatever version of him had helped us earlier. This was one of them, wearing his form like an ill-fitting suit. "The entities are getting desperate," Beverly murmured. "Dawn is coming." The Loft thing smiled, the expression stretching its face unnaturally wide. "You've done well to make it this far, but you've misunderstood something fundamental." It gestured to the tree behind us. "That isn't your salvation. It's a trap." I glanced at the rules paper. Nothing had changed. Rule 16 still instructed us to recite the words at first light. "You're lying," I said with more confidence than I felt. The thing wearing Loft's face tilted its head. "Am I?" "Think, Daniel. How many survivors were there from Flight 401? In the official record?" 75, I answered automatically. "And how many do you think found their way to this island? Followed the rules? Performed the ritual at this tree?" I didn't respond. "All of them," it continued. "Every single one. And where are they now?" It spread its arms wide, indicating the empty clearing. "Gone. Absorbed. Part of us now." I looked at the personal items hanging from the tree branches with new horror. Were these the only remnants of previous survivors who had stood exactly where we stood? "The tree is ancient," the thing said, taking a step closer. "Older than the Everglades themselves. It feeds on hope, the most delicious emotion of all, more sustaining than fear, more potent than despair." The sky was definitely lighter now, minutes until dawn. "Don't listen," Beverly urged. "It's trying to make us break the rules." The entities at the edge of the clearing began to move forward, slowly closing the circle around us. "The rules were created by us," the Loft thing said. "Did you really think Captain Loft wrote them? Poor, guilty Captain Loft trying to save passengers to atone for his mistake?" It laughed, a horrible sound like water bubbling through a throat. "We created the rules. We created the ritual. We guide survivors here, again and again and again." My mind raced, trying to separate truth from manipulation. The entities were liars. They'd proven that repeatedly. But what if this one particular claim was true? The eastern horizon was now visibly brighter. The first rays of sun would break through any minute. The entities continued their slow advance. There were dozens of them now, all converging on the cypress tree where we stood. Final chance, the loft thing said, now just yards away. Step away from the tree. Come with us. We can show you true escape, not the false promise of that ritual. Beverly gripped my arm. Daniel, the sun. Look. A thin edge of gold had appeared on the horizon, visible through a gap in the trees. Dawn had arrived. The entities let out a collective hiss, their movements becoming more urgent, less coordinated. The loft thing's face began to melt, revealing the featureless countenance beneath. Rule 16, I said firmly, turning to face east. Beverly did the same beside me. Together, we recited, "What was lost is found. What was taken is returned. The cycle breaks, but memory remains." The entity shrieked, lunging toward us as we squeezed our eyes shut. I felt cold, wet hands grabbing at my clothes, trying to pull me away from the tree. The smell of stagnant water and decay filled my nostrils. I kept my eyes tightly closed, repeating the words in my mind like a mantra. What was lost is found. What was taken is returned. The cycle breaks, but memory remains. The hands clutching at me suddenly felt less substantial, as if turning to mist. The shrieks of the entities grew distant, fading like a receding storm. And then, impossibly, I felt solid ground beneath my feet. Not the soft soil of the island, but hard concrete. City sounds replaced the noises of the Everglades. Car horns, distant voices, the rumble of air conditioning units. Still, I kept my eyes closed, afraid of what I might see if I opened them. "Daniel," Beverly's voice came from beside me, trembling with emotion. "Daniel, I think we made it. We're back."